As we believe you, your heirs, and the town of East Lyme have much to gain by preserving your parcel. Therefore, we're prepared to discuss the details of finances and easement stipulations with you as you request. So, and I believe that all of you were in possession of the memorandum that Tobin had put together. Because there was some question, as me sitting as a member of the Board of Finance, what we needed to do to bring this forward. And clearly, if it goes on to the Board of Finance, I certainly have no intention. I haven't discussed it with any of my members. I will recuse myself, as our first selectman had done. But that said, I agree with everything that was in your legal opinion. Certainly, we want to maintain, as this letter said, transparency, and it's imperative that we maintain the public trust in town. And there's various other things in there that say the town might address the following in its considerations of the purchase of the property, or the purchase, in this case, of rights in the property or conservation easement. Has the property been specifically identified as a parcel that the town should acquire prior to its offer to the town? Have all town agencies which might have an interest in the property, e.g. planning, conservation, wetlands, approved the transaction? Has the town obtained independent third-party appraisals? And it goes on in closing to say, in summary, there is no blanket prohibition on the town acquiring property that a member of the Board of Finance has an interest in. The member cannot participate in any way in proceedings before the Board of Finance. His or her interest in the transaction must be disclosed to any town board or agency which considers the purchase. The process must be such that the citizens of the town can be comfortable that the transaction is at arm's length and in the best interest of the town. So clearly I want to make sure that everybody does know that, because I fully want this to be transparent and vetted by the town. Just a few other things that we have applied for a federal grant. So as Whit Beals had said, we have a state grant we're in front of. We were one of two people to be the first people to apply to the USDA Forest Service Community Forest Plan Grant Program. And it's a program very similar to the state's. It's designed to protect property, to deal with water quality, sustainable forest management. In this case, there's a good likelihood that it can function as an outdoor classroom, very similar to the hole in the wall. And I'll just share one other thing with you. The USDA just awarded to the NRCS in the state of Connecticut. It's a program called the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. And what they did was just grant $10 million to the state to study the Long Island Watershed Initiative. And I'll get copies. Since you're not going to vote tonight, I think I'll get some other copies that at least you can look at. Because this is a fairly large initiative. It covers the entire watershed for Long Island Sound. It encompasses the entire state of Connecticut. And as we know, in many of the things, that our greatest natural resource in Connecticut is Long Island Sound. So there's a big push on as far as water quality, and I just believe that this is consistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development, and it should be pushed. I believe it should be pushed forward. It should be moved forward to the town. Let them decide if there's interest in implementing our open space plan of conservation and development. I'd also like to, if you'll allow, Art Carlson is in the audience, and I know he's spoken in front of many of the different commissions. If you had any questions, regarding, whatever it is pertinent to the open space plan that he was involved with in his commission, and Arthur has been a fierce advocate of conservation and the water issues in town. And I'm happy to answer, any other questions that you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Harney or Mr. Beals?
I do have a bunch, and I'm going to apologize now if these were already asked at other
Mark.
meetings. What was the appraisal for?
What was the value on them?
Yeah. Was
There was, Yeah, there were two appraisals done, called the Yellow Book appraisals, which is the federal land acquisition standard. And they appraise, the entire parcel is 209 acres. So the land, 167 acres was part of the application. So they do a before and after. So the appraisal for the entire piece was $1,675,000, and I think $1,850,000 on each appraisal. And the land that was going into open space was $1,210,000 and $1,250,000.
Was that broken down by the appraiser?
Yeah, it was. It has to be by the
So
standards.
the 209 was 167, and the 1.2 was the land that you're.
Yeah, there's an option. There's a contract for $1,225,000. That's what was submitted to the DEP. The DEP had a fairly extensive grant application.
Okay.
And within that, there was a copy of the option agreement. There was letters of recommendation. So there was letters of support from the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Commission, Inland Wetlands, SCOG, the Niantic River Watershed Commission. So that, yeah, and I can give you a copy of that. You know, since it's not going to be voted on, if you'd like to see the actual grant package that was sent, it has all that information in it.
Okay, and is that the sales price that's being?
Sales price is $1,225,000 for that 167 acres.
Okay. Why? How did you break up the land? You had 209 acres. How did you break up the 40, and why? And why is that not part of this
Well,
purchase?
it could be part of it. You know, my plan was the plan for the partnership is to maybe carve 4 or 5 more lots out of it. What I had wanted to do was terminate the subdivision, create, I'll say, 4 or 5 more lots. What I really wanted to do was have a couple of lots for group homes I have a special needs daughter, so I was interested in creating a couple of lots that could have group homes just because of where it is. There's sidewalks down, the high school and shopping. One of the driving factors also is we were awarded the largest grant that they give, $500,000 from the DEP. It's a 50-50 match, so anything over $1 million, you know, you're really on your own to raise additional money from philanthropic organizations, philanthropic individuals, the town. So that other land could go in there. It's not like I'm trying to hang on to it. I think that other piece would be another candidate for an application for grants, if you follow what I'm saying.
Okay.
There was a point where you maxed out the value of the grant, so anything really over $1 million, you know, you're faced with coming to the municipality or going to raise money.
Was the original intent to put 4 or 5, or was the original intent to put more? I'm just wondering why that 40 was carved out. Is that flatter land, or is it because it's contingent according to your?
We kind of worked backwards. We worked
Right.
backwards and said, let's create $1 million worth of land and go in with that. The fact is, after it appraised out, and you know, the appraisals are very consistent. I think it came in at $7,500 an acre. You know, it wasn't like some other parcels that were higher and a few other ones that were looking at it, you know, major 7-figure numbers. It was really backing into it because to maximize the value of the grant program, it capped off at $1 million worth of value. So really, we could, if we accomplish this one, we could go in with 35 acres as another grant application and you know, essentially have almost the entire thing in open space. So it was really designed to maximize your ability to raise money through the state, through federal grants.
The stream that feeds the river, is that all part of the land that you're that's
Yeah.
part of this deal, or does part of
Well-
that go into that 40 acres?
No, actually, in the line for the 40 acres really was also drawn at the ridge line. If you go walk this property, there's the ridge line that actually carries on after you
Sure.
cross Route 1 and really becomes the Oswegatchie Hills ridge line.
Correct.
This is called Sodom Hill. So yeah, that stream, or the headwaters of the Niantic Rivers, is totally on
It's on the
the
other side.
167 acres.
Okay. If the town purchased it, who is going to retain ownership of the land, and who is going to? Are there any easements
Well,
on the land?
My
And
sug-
who
my-
plans on managing the land?
my suggestion would be, and I know we've had different discussions with different people on what the town should own. So my personal opinion is the fee of the property is better to be held by New England Forestry, because you're going to put a conservation easement on there. And the conservation easement, the state of Connecticut is going to require a conservation easement because that's part of their grant program. You know, the real teeth of protecting land in perpetuity, and maybe it's fortuitous that Attorney O'Connell is here because they were successful in defending a protracted case on conservation easements, is the value of the conservation, once it's recorded on the land records, that's the meat of the deal to extinguish the development rights. So you want to bifurcate the ownership of the piece with who holds the conservation easement. So my advice would be to have New England Forestry hold the fee to the property. A conservation easement will be put on the state of Connecticut because that's required. They want to know that there's no structures, it's an open space in perpetuity, and there's passive recreation, which is walking trails. The town could hold the conservation if they were so inclined, or the East Lyme Land Trust could, and the management of the property really could be a combination. You know, New England Forestry's got a 70-year history. I think they're a great partner. They have in excess of 26,000 acres in New England that they own the fee of, and somewhere in the vicinity of 1,150,000 acres, I think, that they hold the conservation easement on and manage the wildlife habitat and the forestry and everything. So I don't believe it's in the best interest of the town to own it, but I think the whole intent here is to make sure that the development rights are extinguished and it's in open space in perpetuity.
If the New England Forestry, if this goes through and New England Forestry has it, are they allowed to do, depending on what the conservation is, can they do for-profit logging and stuff like that?
Well, I'll let them speak to that. They do sustainable forest management and best practices. So the goal is not to turn here and just harvest wood. It's to really...
I'm not worried about that, but just who that money goes to, if that is done. Because I believe in best management practices too.
It's not going to me.
In most situations, we underwrite some of our annual operating costs through harvesting on our properties throughout New England. But we have formed partnerships with the town to share revenues with towns and other places. And if in fact we get some funding from the U.S. Forest Service through that grant request, we would be required to share some funding with East Lyme. There would be a management committee that would be set up, made up of various entities here and the various stakeholders here in the town. School system, Natural Resources Commission, who else? East Lyme Land Trust I can certainly see as another stakeholder on that committee. So,
Okay.
yes. And all of our properties throughout New England are green certified through Forest Stewardship Council and through American Tree Farm System. So we have third-party auditors looking over our shoulders in all our practices. Our mission as an organization is to put excellent forestry on the ground. And in some cases, we have forever wild properties that we don't harvest at all. And there may be portions of this property that are so wet that we wouldn't want to interfere with or disrupt any of the wetland functions. So the first thing we would do, I think I explained it in an earlier meeting, would be to do a complete natural resources inventory of the property, wildlife habitat, wetlands, trees, everything. And from that, we would build a forest management plan.
Okay. Has this property ever been proposed for subdevelopment?
It was back in the raging 80s, as I call it. That particular phase was engineered and test pits were done on a conventional subdivision. So it has never been looked at. Well, certainly it hasn't been looked at from the standpoint of an affordable housing project. It really hasn't been looked at in some condo format. It was laid out, I think, for 90 conventional lots. I don't think anyone would go in there to do that today. I think they'd either look for higher density and, clustering.
If you were to put a cluster development, do you know what the yield plan would be for that land? So we're always looking at, whether we buy it. I mean, if
Well-
this land, like for example, I don't know this land too well. I know that there's a ridge. I know that we have the
Sure.
wetland stuff like that.
Well-
Is it possible that this land is completely undevelopable? I know
Oh, no,
you had the
not
40
at all.
acre.
Not at all.
So what
Not
would
at
the
all.
yield? I know there's steep slopes.
Well, we could talk to Gary, but, in some respects, there's a corner of the parcel that's in the sewer shed. So, if we wanted to get crazy, I guess for lack of a better example, since it hit the paper this week and the whole landmark thing, is you could come in with an affordable housing development on there and probably purport or claim to do the same thing. Otherwise, you could
But
go
besides affordable housing, regular subdivision, CDD.
Yeah, no, you,
What-
you could get down below. You could probably do what was done before. You just wouldn't do it. You could get down below the ridge lines because there's all logging roads in there presently that was laid out in the original subdivision concept. So I would say you could do 90, you could do 100 and something if you really got serious and the market conditions were right.
What's the public access going to be if this was purchased? Where would the public access right-of-ways be?
The primary one is down at the end of Cedar Brook Road and Goldfinch, right where the pump station is for the water.
Is that something that needs to be deeded? Is that private land? Is it going to have to go? It seems like to me it's going to have to go through private land
To get to.
to get to the access point
Oh, no.
because of the 40 acres that are not on the.
No, the way it's laid out is that piece would have all the frontage from the intersection of Cedar Brook and Goldfinch down to Catbird and actually up a portion of Goldfinch. It's a floating line on there, actually, so we could sit down. That line that's on the map, if I show you the map there, that's not a surveyed line yet. So there's adequate frontage for off-street public access. No question about it. It was designed to have a couple of places to park cars off
Mhm.
street and walk in there. I don't know, do you have a map in front of you or no?
Yeah, I do. From the document you gave me.
Yeah, all this down here. And this line here can be moved. That's not a big deal. But that's all the front.
Okay, and I'm sure the appraisal will speak for itself. But how were the appraisals done? Were they done on what could be developed there? Was it done on?
Nope. This is
comps or-
strictly raw and in its natural state. I mean, you're not going to find anything that gets appraised as a developable piece at $7,000 an acre. So all the comps for this were raw land, big blocks of raw land.
Okay.
Yeah.
When I look at so maybe you could answer this. When I look
Good.
at the value of the land as appraised by the town, it's $475,000. What's the discrepancy between the appraised value that you had from the yellow
Well, it's in
book
four.
and
It's in a voluntary forestry class. So anybody with big blocks of land, the majority of that assessed value is a building lot, some excess acreage, and right now there's 140 acres classified in forestry. So people will always ask the question, well, geez, if it comes off the grand list, the tax on the vast majority of that's in forest brings in $370 a year to the town. So you as a large landowner can put land in what's called 490. So if you talk to the assessor, you put a forest management plan together, you file, and the value of the land goes down to, I think, $120-something an acre.
Will this be if this is purchased by the town? If it goes into ownership of the forestry, is there taxes paid on that land, even though it's conservation,
No, I don't believe so.
or is that considered
If it goes to a 501c3, then it's taken off
forever?
forever.
Forever, and it's conservation forever.
So the town would lose $363.
Okay. We all know the problems Nyack River is under and the pressures. We hear it's the headwaters of Nyack River. One thing I'm trying to get my head around is, I think the majority of the Nyack River flows from Latimer Brook. The stream that we're talking about, the headwaters of the Nyack River, do you know about roughly the water flow that comes from there compared to Latimer Brook?
I don't, because that ridge line actually breaks the Niantic River watershed and the Latimer Brook watershed.
Okay, but would Art know by any chance? I mean, is it a significant contributor to the water quality going to Nyack River, or is it?
Art, you'll have to come up so people can hear you talk, please. Thank you.
Art Carlson. The answer to that is, I can't give it to you in gallons. It's certainly less.
Sure.
But
Percent-wise or something?
But the answer is, you're talking about roughly 180 acre watershed that all drains into the Niantic River. That's the way you should look at this thing, okay? That's a smaller local watershed. There's about 400 acres that drains from that brook that
Sure.
you're talking about. And what the value of this would be from an environmental point of view is, we are constantly flushing clean water out of the forest into the river. Okay? The issue with Long Island Sound is to see if we could flush more clean water into Long Island Sound. Here, we're already doing it. If we put houses on there, then we're going to lower the quality of water that's going to be flushed into the river. Okay? For example, Oswegatchie Hills, one of its virtues is clean water runs off into the river. That's exactly the virtue of this piece of property. That's how it got onto the open space plan.
Right.
Okay, what are its virtues? That's the answer. So that's an unquantified answer, but the answer is the function of this property. Okay, continued clean water goes in.
Okay. One more question. I'm sorry for hogging all the questions, Ollie.
You're forgiven. Just this once.
And I apologize if some of these are repeated. You're proposing that the town pays, the state pays, but it's going to go to, the ownership is going to stay with New England Forestry. What guarantees do we have that the public has access to this property?
Well, that's stipulated in the state grant. As I told you, the state grant wants to know primarily two things, that it in fact is an open space in perpetuity, which is why they require a conservation easement. And the language in there also says there has to be access to the public for passive recreation. So that becomes, I'll say, a deed restriction. It's a covenant against the property, and it's part of the conservation easement. So that really should be held by, primarily it'll be held by the state of Connecticut, but they don't want any responsibility in managing it. And I would think that the town would want to be a junior holder of a conservation easement in some way. But the fact is, even if the town isn't, that mechanism will be in there. It has to be in there, or it disqualifies you from the grant.
I'll just expand on that a little bit. I talked at a previous meeting before your board about granting not just a conservation easement, but granting a trail easement, so the public access would be guaranteed. So that, and we've done that in the past with other transactions. So that
Okay.
absolutely, set in, if not stone, then it's recorded.
Okay.
Yes.
Mark, I'll just do this. I don't know if I assume you've seen that, maybe you haven't. This is part of the Yukon study that was done.
Yep.
For unique value. So that's the parcel, that magenta color really.
Is this the love study, or what they call it?
Yeah, land
Yeah.
of unique value.
Yeah. Just one final question. Is it if the town were to put money up, is it a dead deal if the town wanted ownership of it? See?
I'm in the real estate, but nothing is a dead deal, Mark.
But it's a dead deal with the private-public partnership. I know the state's going to kick the money, because if this was the case, the state and the town, the public is going to be putting in over 75% of it, but they won't retain ownership of it besides a conservation easement.
I mean, I guess the question would be, why do they, I mean, I've always asked this question, why does the town want to own anything that is in fact preserved in perpetuity? So to me,
It's a fair question, but I still want to, yeah.
yeah, I mean, that,
But is it a dead deal if the town decided they wanted ownership of it, or the state?
I don't know if it's,
Not necessarily. I think anything's negotiable.
See here, what's unique about this is a lot of times people won't even sell their property. What they'll do, for a rule of thumb, a conservation easement, when you go raise money or put it on there, it's about 80% of the market value. In this particular case, we said we go sell the property. So in a lot of cases, extremely wealthy people or high net worth people that have large ownership of land, they'll put a conservation easement on there. And if they don't raise money, they'll get a substantial tax deduction because they're extinguishing the development rights, and it really becomes almost a charitable type situation. But I'd be curious to have the dialogue, so I don't know if it's a yes or no thing. I'm just kind of curious almost why the town wants to own it, what's...
I just want to know the options. And my other question is, you're asking for...
Final question?
And I lied about
The
that.
final,
Right.
final
This
question.
is an awfully
Yeah,
long
this is the
final
last question, just
question.
because the 500,000 from the state, you're asking for 350 from the town. That only is 850. You're asking for 1.225. Where the remaining coming from private partnership?
No, we're going to go out and raise...
You also have the federal one going if that comes.
Well,
up.
we don't know if that, but at any rate, I've always said the template for things like this, we don't have to go too far down the road to Old Saybrook to the huge one they just did, the preserve. And the preserve had state money put up. The town bonded $3 million, and they went out with the Trust for Public Land and raised $3 million through what I'll call that private part of the public-private partnership, which is philanthropic foundations and philanthropic individuals. And it could be local people, but truthfully, when you do projects this size, most of the money outside of the grants is raised in what they'll call the quiet phase, which is you get people with the capacity to give money, and then people that have an affinity for the cause, which in this case is conservation and water quality and everything. So the balance of that money will come from the private sector.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that really your last? No.
Holly?
It will be.
For a guy who never heard it, those are very good questions, Mark. Thanks. No, really.
Thanks.
My only question was something that was brought up last time, and I don't know whether you've been waiting for this to move forward. The discussion of having some public information sessions to let the townspeople know exactly of what this project consisted.
Our intention is to still do that. I think since we really came in here, well, let me just backtrack. At the actual point in time that this grant money was available, we needed a qualified applicant, and the East Lyme Land Trust, or East Lyme Niantic Land Conservation Trust, had lost its tax-exempt status. So through the efforts of some of the local residents, that has been resurrected and reinstated. So I really think moving forward, we want to have a strategic alliance, and I say we. I've talked to New England Forest because I think they're a great partner. We locally can learn a lot from them. They've been around 70 years, and again, I'll give you some information because you weren't here before to just read up on them. So to answer your question, Howie, yes, our intention still is, if it moves forward to this board, it gets moved forward from the Board of Finance. We really intend to do a mailing, and I think do a public forum in conjunction with the East Lyme Land Trust, potentially the Commission on Natural Resource Conservation, because it all dovetails. And at that point, I think we've gone out. But in all the time we've been kicking this around, I can speak for myself and some of the other people in town that are advocates for implementing the open space plan. There's a lot of support